Hey everybody, Jake here with TrendSpider to go over the weekend market update and really go over some of the broad markets, some crypto, and a few individual names that had some really big moves this week. But before we do that, just wanted to mention that we do have the St. Patrick's Day sale going on until March 24th. You can get 50% off any plan, and that is either a monthly or annual plan. So definitely check it out. You can click the link in the details below and get more information on that. And remember, we do have the 7-day free trial where you can try this out and you can get locked into that 50% off. So if you signed up today, you would still get 7 days free. And then at the end of that 7 days, you'd get the 50% off. So let's dive right into the charts. SPY finally broke out of the symmetrical triangle here. You can see here that we also had quite a bit of supply. So this area here with a lot of volume acted as supply on Wednesday. And even initially into Thursday, but then we just blasted right through it up to the January high anchored VWAP. And then today on Friday, we pulled back, just tested this volume shelf, previous supply acting as a demand zone now. And then you had a continuation move into the end of Friday. So just really 4 straight days to the upside. So just some impressive action here. And you can tell by the weekly candle, this is a very, very strong reversal. Now, do we get a little bit of a pullback next week? We'll just have to see. But if you do look back in history, some of these bigger moves to the upside have been starts of bigger moves to the upside. Now, going into the Qs, a little bit of the same. So you can see here that we did break out through a few important levels here. So if we simply just draw this resistance zone, you can see here that we did break out of that area, this falling wedge. I did have a trend line here too, so if you guys want to see where that trend line was drawn, just do that to here and do that. So you can see that we had this falling wedge. You can see that we finally broke out of it. And initially we did have some supply. So this area here highlighted as the volume shelf was initially supply on Thursday. And then we did have some trouble getting through it at the beginning of the day. But then into really the last few hours of trading on Friday, we just blasted right through it. So anytime you've got supply turning into this kind of demand volume shelf zone, that is definitely something to keep an eye on. If we do pull back, expect this volume shelf area to be kind of a level of support. Now, on the weekly side of things, you can see here that this COVID low VWAP held almost to the cent here. So definitely make sure you're using these anchored VWAPs, and they're incredibly powerful. They're really just being able to visualize raw supply and demand and really the average of all participants in the market from a specific point in time. So you can see here at this point, when we were way up here in the 400 area, the average participant since the COVID low was up about 30%. As the price moved back down, everyone went back to around break even that still had shares. So what happens is supply dries up here because nobody has a profit to sell anymore. And then that combined with any demand coming in can give you some really big moves to the upside, which is what we saw in really across the market this week. Now, IWM, same thing. We had a really nice move up here. The main thing that I was watching was this January high VWAP zone, which really acted as a level of resistance multiple times since the early January highs. So you can see that here we had, let's make this red just to highlight it as resistance. We had this area acting as resistance 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then finally broke through it this week. And so that is really a little bit of a status quo change from what we've seen the past times that we have tested this area. So if we do pull back, expect this VWAP zone to kind of have an SR flip, so previous resistance becoming potential support below. And then we also have that volume shelf here acting as a base for price as well. Now, on the weekly side of things, you can see that we did actually test the COVID low perfectly a couple weeks ago and then continued to hit higher lows this week before just blasting off. You can see that we did break through this diagonal resistance. If you wanted to maybe start this from a little higher up, you can see here that we are pretty much right at that resistance zone. So definitely an area to watch going into next week. And a lot of these charts that we'll go over on the individual names, some of these names are still below their support zones and just retesting them. So, this is a very good start to a potential reversal, especially going into strong seasonality into April. but just keep in mind, 1 week is not going to make or break the entire market, but it's a good start. Looking at Bitcoin, this is a our risk on, risk off indicator here. And you can see here that we did break out of this descending triangle earlier this week. So if we anchor the VWAP and the volume by price from this November high, you'll see here that we had a lot of volume supporting price here, and we finally broke out. And then we had this volume gap. We had a lot of area from around 39.3 all the way up to around 41.7, where there just wasn't a lot of volume here. So the price was able to move through this area very quickly. Now what we're getting to now is this next area of break-even supply. And remember, break-even supply is just an area where these coins, whatever we want to call Bitcoin, this volume here, which was holding at an unrealized loss, is getting back to break even, and you may see some supply come on the market as people break even and want to get out of the trade. So this area from around 42 to around 43 is going to be an area that you really want to get through. And if you can get through this area over the weekend into early next week, then I would expect a retest of this VWAP zone, which has been at resistance zone multiple times over the last couple weeks and months, from around 44 to 45K. And remember, it's Bitcoin. You do have to have a little more margin of error compared to maybe any stocks you're looking at. So this can be very volatile, and you can get some big overshoots. So anywhere from around, let's call it 44, 250, all the way up to around 45.4. Now on the weekly chart, you can see here that we're really starting to pinch here. We've got the COVID low VWAP zone as your support zone that's held multiple times over the last really 12 months or so. You can see that here. Initially, we had this zone here, and then we had it test multiple times over the last several weeks, pretty much since the beginning of 2022. And you can see here this VWAP, which is just the same VWAP that we have on the daily, kind of creating this pinch. So price is getting kind of coiled within these two parameters, and we'll just have to see which way it breaks. If the market does continue to be risk on, I would definitely expect this to break to the upside. But for now, we're just trading within that range that I mentioned before. Ethereum finally got the breakout. So we do have a symmetrical triangle breakout here on Ethereum. Same thing, we had a lot of volume supporting price here, and then we finally got that move through this symmetrical triangle. And remember, you can definitely play with inside this symmetrical triangle, but a lot of people wait for price to break up or break down to take a trade, and that's why a lot of the time you'll get a big blast off or a sell off when you do break one of these levels, just because you have a lot of new participants coming in as the markets become a little more clear on direction. So if we do continue up, that VWAP area from November 30th, the November 30th pivot is right up around 3,200. On the weekly chart, same thing. You can see here that we do have this September 2020 low. This is kind of just a really big capitulation point. This was really the reset for Ethereum before your continuation up. And you'll see here it looks a lot like the Bitcoin COVID VWAP, where you had multiple instances where you've tested this zone and then finally we're bouncing off of it right now. Just quick glance, just looking at these previous areas, you definitely would want to get through this diagonal resistance zone. And that is, that is kind of right in line with that VWAP here. So if we wanted to actually turn that VWAP on the weekly chart, it's actually a little higher. So we'd want to break out of this resistance zone and then really get through that 3,200, which is that VWAP zone above. Now, if you want to anchor it from the actual high up here, the all-time high, that would be even a little higher. That would put you closer to around 3,400 or so. So as I mentioned, the reason why I started on the November 30th pivot is mainly because that was the start of this symmetrical triangle. So it's pretty cool to be able to say, all right, the volume weighted average price of this symmetrical triangle is right around 3,180 to 3,200. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're starting the volume weighted average price from the start of the symmetrical triangle and essentially getting the volume weighted average price of this symmetrical triangle. So definitely look for around 3,200 above. And if we anchor VWAP from that all-time high, then that's going to be closer to 3,400 that we really need to get above. Now, going into some individual names, we've got Tesla to start out with. Tesla had a pretty classic move to the upside today after breaking out. So what's really cool about this is notice we broke out of this resistance zone, and then we moved right up to this break-even supply zone above. And the reason why this was able to move up so quickly was you didn't have a lot of supply above. Kind of the same thing that we just talked about on Bitcoin. You don't have a lot of volume here, so there's not a lot of friction for price to get through. And so now this break-even supply zone from around 90, let's say 900 to around 915 is definitely an area where you may have some trouble, at least initially, getting through, as some of these shares are back to break even after dealing with quite a big drawdown over the last couple months. Now, this is what I mentioned before. At this point, Tesla is really just maybe going to retest this previous support, acting as potential resistance. So not incredibly sold here yet. Could definitely break through this area and continue up. But for now, we would simply just be retesting this previous support, which would now act as resistance. And same thing that I just did with the symmetrical triangle. If I create a VWAP at the start of this trend, we can actually see by this blue line, what is the volume weighted average price? What essentially is the dollar cost average of anyone who's participated in the market since the start of this trend? And you can see that we did bounce off that area almost perfectly this week. So definitely want to use the VWAPs from specific points. That's where the anchor part comes in. It is just an incredibly powerful way to not only see, capitulation VWAPs or earnings VWAPs. It's also a great way to simply just see the VWAP of a trend or a setup, whether that's a symmetrical triangle, ascending triangle, any of those. So if you want to see the VWAP of any type of pattern or trend, just start it from the start of that trend or pattern, and then you can essentially visualize what is the volume weighted average price since the start of that setup or trend. Going into SE, this is one that also had a really strong move. I mean, it's kind of hard to find too many stocks that didn't have an incredibly strong move. Especially growth names. Those were the ones that really had a strong move to the upside this week. And you can see we've got a pretty just classic downward sloping resistance zone here that we moved up into on Friday. And this is what we're going to call break-even supply, because you have a lot of shares about to get back to break even after dealing with, let's say that you bought up here at 144. You dealt with a 40% drawdown. So as you're getting back to essentially where you bought, you may unload some shares. You may take the whole position off the table. So that is why we're going to call this break-even supply up to around 150, almost on the dot at this point. So if we can get above this break-even supply zone, that would really be incredibly strong for SE here. Same thing on the weekly, where that I was just talking about on Tesla, this previous VWAP from the 2019 low. So if you follow my my arrow here, this acted as support multiple times along the way up, bounced a couple times in January and February, and then we broke down. And so if we just move up to this area, that would also be a potential resistance zone above, which is also right in line, a little lower than that break-even supply. So initially, we'd want to get through this VWAP right around 130. If we get through that VWAP from the 2019 low, then that break-even supply zone goes up all the way to around 145, 150. PayPal is the next one. This thing was an absolute monster, especially on Friday, just into the end of the day. And we had a pretty classic just symmetrical triangle here that broke out, and we just didn't look back after that. So if you do want to use the gap snake, you'll see here that we do have quite a big gap above. And remember, if you don't want the gaps to connect, because you do have a gap down here, pretty much you gapped up through the symmetrical triangle, you can make this ATR bigger. So you're only looking at the biggest gap. So let's make this 1. You'll see that this gap here goes away, and we're just looking at this gap above, and then you can go in and create an alert at that line. So you're able to essentially have the system let you know when we start to enter that gap by using this alert. So that is a little hack with the gap snake. If you do want to kind of only look at bigger gaps, make that ATR factor, that gap factor, a little bigger. And then this is probably my favorite chart. Just looking at this long-term support zone. I mean, look at how many times we've tested this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe a couple more with these wicks. And just you had a little bit of an undercut, pretty classic undercut here, and then just an absolute blast off this week, and just a really strong move to the upside. Is this the start of a reversal in the trend? We'll just have to see. But if you do look at the monthly chart and how it's forming, you do, at least at this point, have a decent monthly hammer starting to form here. And you do still have these higher lows from the IPO. So this is still technically in an uptrend with higher lows. You just have to go back quite a ways to see that. And it just shows how far this has gone over the last 7 years to have that big of a drawdown and still have higher lows here. Next one is NEO. NEO definitely had an incredibly strong reversal. One thing I was keeping an eye on were these gaps below that just absolutely did not even get close to filling. So, the one thing that I will mention, though, very similar to a lot of the other charts that I've mentioned here, for now, one, you're still in this downtrend. You still have quite a bit of resistance above, shown by this red zone, but also right around 23, 24, you've got a lot of this break-even supply. But keep in mind, until you get to this area, there's not a lot of volume, and that's why the price has really had a nice day on Friday, being able to move up so quickly. It's essentially like a vacuum for price, similar to how a price gap works. Now, on the weekly chart, same exact thing as Tesla. The charts look relatively similar. We broke down through this long-term support zone. At this point, if we moved up to test this, we would simply just be having an SR flip, meaning previous support is becoming resistance. So this is a key level that you want to break above in order to kind of invalidate that simple retest of previous support acting as resistance. So if we can get above, let's say 25 on the weekly side of things and close above that, I think that would invalidate this potential previous support acting as resistance. Now, last one is MU. MU, talk about kind of a frustrating stock, especially on Friday when the rest of the market was ripping. One thing that I will point out here is we tried to get above the VWAP from this high here in early March, and we closed literally maybe to the penny right at it. So we closed above it yesterday on Thursday, and then we closed right at it today. So for now, we still have this VWAP area right around 79.50 to get through. And with this wick, this is where you definitely want to look and see, okay, what's going on here within this wick? And that's when you just turn on the raindrop to see what's going on. And if we do that, you'll see that, there's actually a more volume than you'd expect within that wick. Remember, the wick was pretty much all the way, remember, we closed right around 79.40. So within this wick, there's actually a decent volume profile. Notice here we actually have quite a bit of volume supporting price above the VWAP here as well. So, could this be setting up for kind of a launch off this VWAP into next week? It looks like that could potentially be the case, but same thing that we just went over with a lot of these other names, this previous support at this point is just going to act as resistance above until we can really get above, let's call it, I'm going to call it like 82. So if we can get above and close on the weekly above 82, I definitely think this could invalidate this SR flip here. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully everybody had a great week of trading. And remember, we do have that St. Patrick's Day sale going on until the 24th of March. And that's 50% off any plan, any time frame, whether that's a monthly or an annual subscription. And remember, if you do enjoy these videos, we try to do them about twice a month. And if you do like them, like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.